The reading of my father's will lasted exactly 17 minutes. I know because I counted every second, watching the grandfather clock in the corner of his study while my brothers divided an empire worth $18 million. My name is Preston Thorne, though the Thorns part has always come with an asterisk. I'm 28 years old, and I've spent every one of those years being reminded that I'm the son who shouldn't exist. My father, Victor Thorne, built his real estate empire from nothing, or so the Forbes articles claimed. He died 5 days ago at his desk, his hand still gripping a pen, signing contracts until his heart gave out. The man worked himself to death, and somehow that seemed fitting. He'd lived his entire life in transaction mode, everything measured in profit and loss, including his children, especially me. Attorney Raymond Finch sat across from us at the mahogany table, his weathered hands arranging documents with practiced precision. To my left sat my oldest brother Garrett, 35, already wearing our father's Rolex he'd claimed from the body. To my right, Holden, 32, texting his wife about which property they'd move into first. And then there was me, the illegitimate son, the reminder of our father's one moment of weakness with his secretary 29 years ago. The Manhattan properties, including the 3 penthouses on Fifth Avenue and the 2 commercial buildings in Tribeca, valued at $8 million, I leave to my son Garrett. Finch read, his monotone voice echoing in the wood-paneled room. Garrett smirked and poured himself another glass of father's 100-year-old scotch. About time, the old man recognized who actually ran the New York operations. The Hampton estate, the complete yacht collection including the Celestial Dream, and all vehicles in the Long Island storage facility, valued at $7 million, I leave to my son Holden. Holden actually laughed out loud. The cars. Miranda is going to lose her mind. There's a 1967 Ferrari in that collection worth $2 million alone. They continued dividing the empire like kids sorting Halloween candy. Stock portfolios, Swiss accounts, art collections, even the corporate jet. Every few minutes, one of them would glance at me with barely concealed amusement, waiting for my name to be called. We all knew it was coming. The question was how little would it be? To Preston, Finch finally said, and both my brothers leaned forward like vultures sensing carrion. Finch reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single brown envelope, aged and slightly bent at the corners. My name was written across it in shaky handwriting that must have been my father's near the end. I leave this envelope, to be opened in private, containing what he needs to know. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds before Garrett exploded with laughter so hard he spilled his scotch. An envelope? He was choking on his own amusement. 25 years of trying to play family and Daddy left you a letter? Holden was more composed, but his eyes sparkled with cruel satisfaction. Maybe it's a thank you card. Thanks for understanding your place, kid. Here's a hallmark moment for your troubles. Or directions to the nearest employment office, Garrett added, already pulling out his phone to text someone the hilarious news. God, wait until the board hears about this. The bastard got paper while we got the kingdom. Finch handed me the envelope with something that might have been sympathy in his eyes. It weighed nothing. 28 years of trying to earn my place in this family, and it all came down to something that weighed less than a credit card bill. Gentlemen, Finch continued, ignoring the laughter, your father insisted I read this final statement. He adjusted his glasses and read, blood may determine birthright, but character determines worth. I trust each of you will receive exactly what you deserve. My brothers were too drunk on victory to catch the strange wording. They were already arguing about who would get Father's office at corporate headquarters. I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket, stood up without a word, and walked toward the door. Hey, Preston, Garrett called out. If you need a job, I might have an opening in building maintenance. You'd have to work your way up from the basement, but hey, you're used to being beneath us, right? I kept walking. Their laughter followed me through the marble foyer, past the portraits of Thorn men who'd never acknowledge me, out into the October afternoon, where my 10-year-old Honda sat between their Maseratis like a punchline to a joke nobody needed to tell. Inside that envelope was a bank account number and 11 words that would reveal 25 years of lies. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I was done begging for scraps from their table. I sat in my car, engine off, staring at that envelope with my name written in dying hands, and wondered what final insult my father had saved for last. I never belonged in the Thorn family, and everyone made sure I knew it. From the moment I could understand words, I understood that I was different, lesser, tolerated but never truly accepted. My earliest memory is of Garrett, then 10 years old, explaining to his private school friends why I lived in their house. "That's Preston," he said, pointing at me playing alone in the corner. "Dad's mistake from his secretary. We keep him around because Dad feels guilty. My mother, Diane Russo, died when I was 3. A car accident on the Long Island Expressway, they told me. Single vehicle, brake failure, tragic but simple. She'd been Victor's secretary for 5 years, and their affair had produced me, the evidence of my father's single lapse in judgment. Victor's wife had already died of cancer 2 years before I was born, so when Diane died, Victor took me in. Not out of love, I learned later, but out of obligation. The Thorn mansion in Westchester was 32 rooms of cold marble and impossible standards. While Garrett and Holden had their names engraved on their bedroom doors, mine simply read, "Guest Room 3. At family dinners, I sat at the far end of the table, close enough to be present but far enough to be forgotten. Victor would ask his sons about their days at Princeton, their internships at the company, their thoughts on market trends. To me, he'd occasionally nod and ask if I needed anything for school. "No, sir," was always my answer, even when I did. Holden was subtler in his cruelty than Garrett, but more effective. Where Garrett used blunt force, Holden used surgical precision. He'd invite me to join him and his friends, then spend the entire time explaining why I couldn't participate in their activities. "Preston can't come to the country club, guys. They have legitimate member requirements." Or my personal favorite, "Preston understands why he can't be in the family photos." It would confuse the investors. I learned to make myself useful to survive. When Garrett needed someone to write his college essays, I did it. When Holden needed someone to take the blame for crashing the Mercedes, I took it. When Victor needed someone to work 18-hour days at the company without complaint or recognition, I was there. I became fluent in the language of servitude, thinking if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, maybe one day Victor would look at me the way he looked at them, but he never did. At Thorn Industries board meetings, I was introduced as his ward or special project. At charity galas, I was the young man Victor mentors, never son, never family. I watched him pose for pictures with Garrett and Holden at company events while I held their coats off camera. I listened to him tell business associates about his 2 boys while I stood 3 feet away, invisible. The crazy part was that I outperformed both of them in every measurable way. While Garrett and Holden partied through their Ivy League educations on legacy admissions and gentlemen's C's, I earned my way into MIT on merit scholarships. While they showed up to board meetings hungover and unprepared, I built my own consulting firm from nothing, landing 6-figure contracts by 25. My clients included Fortune 500 companies that would laugh Garrett out of the room, but none of it mattered. "You can't make yourself legitimate through achievement," Victor told me once, the closest he ever came to acknowledging my situation. "You are what you are, Preston. Make peace with it." So I tried. I dated a woman named Rebecca for 2 years, never introducing her to my family because how do you explain that you're both a thorn and not a thorn? I rented a small apartment in Brooklyn despite having theoretical access to multiple family properties. I built a life adjacent to but separate from the Thorn Empire, like a satellite that orbits but never lands. Then Victor. started getting sick. The heart problems began last year, and despite the best doctors money could buy, we all knew time was running out. Garrett and Holden circled like sharks, visiting more frequently, suddenly interested in their father's wisdom and stories. They spoke openly about their inheritance plans in front of me, debating which properties they'd keep and which they'd sell. "What do you think Preston will get?" I once heard Holden's wife Miranda ask at a family dinner. "Whatever it is," Holden replied, not bothering to lower his voice, "it'll be more than he deserves." The call about Victor's death came while I was reviewing contracts for a client. "Massive heart attack at his desk," the secretary said. He'd been found slumped over acquisition papers, pen still in hand. Somehow, that detail made me sadder than the death itself. The man had died exactly as he'd lived, alone with his work, measuring worth in square footage and profit margins. Standing in that study 5 days later, watching my brothers celebrate their windfall, I realized I'd spent my entire life trying to earn love from a man who didn't have any to give. Not to them, not to me, not even to himself. The will reading was scheduled for Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock sharp. I arrived at the estate 15 minutes early, parking my Honda behind a catering truck that was unloading champagne. Garrett and Holden had already started their celebration, apparently confident enough in their inheritance to hire party planners before the will was even read. I found them in the study with their wives, drinking Victor's prized Scotch collection and dividing up assets on cocktail napkins like kids trading baseball cards. Garrett's wife, Simone, was on FaceTime with a real estate agent, touring a penthouse in Milan. Miranda, Holden's wife, had spread yacht catalogs across Victor's desk, circling upgrades for the boats she hadn't even inherited yet. "Look who decided to show up," Garrett announced when I walked in, raising his glass in mock salute. "Come to see how the real heirs inherit?" "Just here for the reading," I said, taking a seat in the corner, the same chair I'd always occupied during family meetings. "Smart to manage expectations," Holden added, not looking up from his phone where he was apparently already listing one of the properties he expected to inherit. "Though I'm curious what Dad came up with for you. My bet's on that broken Rolex he never fixed. Seems poetic, giving the broken son the broken watch." Attorney Raymond Finch entered at exactly 2 o'clock, his presence immediately shifting the room's energy from casual cruelty to formal proceeding. He'd been Victor's lawyer for 30 years, had built the entire legal structure of Thorne Industries. If anyone knew Victor's secrets, it was Finch. "Gentlemen, ladies," he nodded to the wives, "shall we begin?" He opened his leather briefcase with practiced efficiency, removing a thick folder marked with Victor's seal. The will itself was surprisingly brief for such a massive estate, but then Victor had always been economical with words. The last will and testament of Victor Edmund Thorne, executed 3 months prior to his death, superseding all previous documents, Finch began, his voice carrying the weight of legal finality. The first 10 minutes went exactly as everyone expected. Garrett inherited the Manhattan real estate portfolio, $8 million of prime properties including the buildings that generated nearly $1 million in monthly rental income. He actually whooped when Finch read the addresses, already calculating expansion possibilities. Holden received the Hampton estate where we'd spent summers, the complete yacht collection that included 3 boats worth over $1 million each, and Victor's entire vehicle collection, including vintage cars that belonged in museums. $7 million in toys for a man who'd never worked an honest day in his life. They split the liquid assets, the stock portfolios, the offshore accounts Victor thought nobody knew about. Each brother walked away with additional millions in investments and cash. Simone was already texting her friends, planning a celebration party at the Met. Miranda had pulled up the yacht club website, registering for slip spaces in Monaco. "To Preston," Finch finally read, and the room went silent with anticipation. He reached into his briefcase again, this time pulling out a single brown envelope, aged and bent at the corners like it had been handled many times. My name was written across it in Victor's handwriting, but shaky, like he'd written it while his hands were already failing. I leave this envelope, to be opened in private, containing what he needs to know. The laughter was immediate and explosive. Garrett actually fell back in his chair, spilling scotch across Victor's Persian rug. Holden was more controlled, but his smirk said everything. An envelope? Garrett wheezed between laughs. 25 years of ass-kissing for a piece of paper? Maybe it's a coupon, Simone suggested, getting in on the joke. 10% off your next therapy session for daddy issues. Or directions to the nearest homeless shelter, Miranda added, since he won't be living in the guest house anymore. Finch handed me the envelope without meeting my eyes. It felt impossibly light, like holding air. 28 years in this family, and my entire inheritance weighed less than a birthday card. Gentlemen, there's one additional matter, Finch continued, his voice cutting through their laughter. Your father insisted I read this statement. He adjusted his glasses and read from a separate paper. Blood may determine birthright, but character determines worth. I trust each of you will receive exactly what you deserve. Sanctimonious to the end, Garrett muttered, already pouring another drink. At least we deserve millions, while Preston deserves stationery. They were too drunk on victory to notice Finch's expression when he read those words, the way his eyes lingered on them like they knew something we didn't. They were too busy planning their new lives to wonder why Victor had insisted that specific phrase be read aloud. I stood to leave, the envelope burning in my pocket. Holden called out as I reached the door. Hey, Preston, when you open that, let us know if it's at least good paper. Maybe you can frame it, hang it in whatever studio apartment you end up in. Their laughter followed me out of the house, past the catering staff setting up for their celebration, past the portraits of Thorn patriarchs who would never claim me, out into the October afternoon where my Honda waited like the only honest thing in my life. I sat in my car for an hour, engine off, staring at that envelope like it might explode. Part of me wanted to tear it up without opening it, preserve what little dignity I had left by refusing to participate in Victor's final humiliation. But curiosity is stronger than pride, especially when you've spent your whole life searching for answers. The parking lot had emptied except for the catering trucks. Through the estate's windows I could see the party beginning, shadows of my brothers and their friends toasting to their good fortune. I turned the envelope over in my hands, feeling the quality of the paper. It was old, maybe decades old, the kind of heavy stock nobody used anymore. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded once. The message was handwritten in Victor's careful script, but steadier than the writing on the envelope, like this had been written years ago when his hands were still strong. Preston, this is for the child who was never supposed to exist. Account number 4 for 7829-1163, Zurich Liberty Bank. Your mother knew why. That was it. No explanation, no fatherly wisdom, no apology. Just a Swiss bank account number and a reference to my dead mother. I read it 5 times, trying to extract meaning from those few words. The child who was never supposed to exist. Even in his final message to me, Victor couldn't resist reminding me I was a mistake. I drove home to my apartment in Brooklyn, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe it was a small trust fund, enough to show he'd thought of me but not enough to matter. Maybe it was symbolic, $100 to match the 100 ways he'd denied me. Or maybe it was nothing, a closed account, one final joke from beyond the grave. My laptop was open on my kitchen table, where I'd left it that morning, working on a client presentation I'd never finish. I navigated to Zurich Liberty Bank's website, their discreet logo promising the Swiss banking privacy that had hidden fortunes for centuries. The login process was simpler than expected. The account number, my social security number, and a security question, mother's maiden name. Russo. Diane Russo, the secretary who'd made the mistake of falling for her boss. Before I could check the balance, before I could learn what Victor's final insult would be, I stopped. There was something else in his message that bothered me. Your mother knew why. I'd never really investigated my mother's death. Why would I? It was a car accident when I was 3. Tragic, but simple. But Victor's words suggested there was something more, something my mother had known. I minimized the banking website and pulled up the New York State Accident Database. It took some searching, but I found it. October 15, 1999. Diane Russo, single vehicle accident, Long Island Expressway. The basic report was what I'd always been told. Brake failure, car went off the road, fatal on impact. But there was a detailed investigation file attached, something I'd never known existed. I downloaded it, my hands starting to shake as I read the investigating officer's notes. Brake line appears to have been deliberately severed. Tool marks consistent with purposeful damage. Recommendation for homicide investigation. Note, investigation terminated at family's request. See attached authorization. The authorization was signed by Victor Thorne. My father had stopped the investigation into my mother's murder. I called Raymond Finch, my fingers fumbling with the phone. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting. Preston. His voice was careful, measured. I assume you've opened it. What the hell is this, Finch? What did Victor know about my mother's death? There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, choosing his words. I can only tell you what Victor authorized me to say. Check the account first, then you'll understand why your mother died. The truth has been waiting for 25 years. Tell me now, I demanded, but the line was already dead. I sat back in my chair, staring at the computer screen. The accident report was still open in one tab, the bank website in another. My mother had been murdered. Victor knew it. And somehow there was a Swiss bank account that would explain everything. I clicked back to the banking website, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The account dashboard loaded slowly, each second stretching like an hour. When the balance finally appeared, I had to blink several times to make sure I was seeing the numbers correctly. This wasn't possible. This had to be an error. I refreshed the page once, twice, 3 times, but the number remained the same. The phone rang, interrupting my shock. Unknown international number. Mr. Preston? The voice was elderly, German accented, formal. My name is Heinrich Drucker. I've been waiting 25 years for you to access this account. I believe it's time you learned the truth about your mother, your father, and the $18 million your brothers just inherited. I looked back at the screen, at the impossible number staring back at me, and realized my entire life had been built on a lie that was about to unravel. I'm listening, I said. The number on my laptop screen didn't make sense. I refreshed the page 3 times, certain there was some error, some misplaced decimal point that would bring this back to reality. But the balance remained unchanged. $127 million. Mr. Preston, are you still there? Heinrich Drucker's voice pulled me back from my shock. This can't be real, I managed to say, gripping the phone like it might disappear. There's been some mistake. There is no mistake, Drucker replied, his German accent giving each word careful weight. This account has been growing for 29 years, waiting for this moment. But the money, Mr. Preston, is just the beginning of what you need to understand. I clicked on the account history, scrolling through decades of deposits. They started in 1996, 3 years before I was born. Regular transfers from something called Project Prometheus. Government serial numbers. Federal routing codes. The final deposit was made October the 15th, 1999, the day my mother died. Your mother, Mr. Preston, was not who you believed her to be, Drucker continued. Diane Russo was not simply a secretary. She was Senior Special Agent Diane Russo, FBI Financial Crimes Division. She was embedded in Thorne Industries as part of a 3-year investigation into your father's money laundering operation. The room started spinning. I had to put my head between my knees to keep from passing out. That's impossible. She was just his secretary. They had an affair. The affair was real, Drucker said gently. That was the problem. Agent Russo fell in love with her target. You were never supposed to happen. When she became pregnant, she tried to extract herself from the operation. She wanted to come clean to Victor, to find a way out that would protect both of you. But Victor found out first, I said, the pieces clicking together in my mind. Yes, he discovered her true identity when you were 2 years old. But by then, something unexpected had happened. Victor had fallen in love with her too, and despite everything, he loved you. The boy who was never supposed to exist had become the only genuine thing in his world of calculated transactions. I thought about all those years of cold distance, the refusal to call me son, the constant reminders that I didn't belong. If he loved me, he had a funny way of showing it. He kept you at a distance to protect you, Mr. Preston. Your brothers, Garrett and Holden, were already being groomed to take over the criminal enterprise. They were 13 and 10 when your mother died, old enough to be dangerous if they knew the truth. If they discovered that you were the son of an FBI agent, that your existence threatened everything they stood to inherit, what do you think would have happened? The murder of my mother suddenly made sense. They killed her, I whispered. Not personally, but yes. When Garrett learned about your mother's true identity, he told Holden. Together, they hired someone to cut her brake lines. They were children, but they were Thorn children, raised to see threats and eliminate them. Victor discovered what they'd done after it was too late. And he covered it up, I said, anger rising in my throat. He made a choice. Turn in his sons for murder, or protect the only innocent person in the entire equation. You. So he made a deal with the FBI. Your mother had compiled 3 years of evidence before her death. Everything needed to destroy the Thorn Empire. Victor would continue to run the operation, feeding information to the Bureau, helping them catch bigger fish. In exchange, they would let the Empire stand until his death, ensuring you grew up protected, if not loved. And the money? Your mother had already started converting evidence to assets, preparing to run with you. She liquidated intelligence, sold information to competitors, moved money through channels that would take decades to trace. It was her insurance policy. When she died, Victor continued the work, adding to it every year. Every crime your brothers committed, every dollar they stole, he matched it in your account. The blood money they're inheriting today is built on the same foundation as your fortune. The difference is, yours is clean. I stood up, pacing my small apartment, trying to process 28 years of lies unraveling in minutes. There's more, Drucker said. Check your secure messages in the account. I clicked the message tab. Hundreds of files appeared. Financial records, photographs, recorded conversations. Evidence of every crime committed by Thorn Industries over 3 decades. But the most recent files were different. They were dated from the last 5 years, all focused on Garrett and Holden. Your brothers weren't just inheriting wealth today, Mr. Preston. They were inheriting the criminal empire, and they've been expanding it enthusiastically, adding murder, extortion, and human trafficking to the family business. Your father documented everything. He wanted you to have the choice he never gave himself. You can walk away with your fortune, or you can deliver justice. The evidence is all there, admissible, incontrovertible. I stared at the files, understanding finally what Victor's last words meant. Character determines worth. He hadn't been mocking me, he'd been passing judgment on all of us. I sat with that power for 3 days, $127 million and enough evidence to destroy everything my brothers had just celebrated inheriting. The rational part of me said to take the money and disappear, build a new life far from the Thorn legacy of blood and lies. But I kept thinking about my mother, dying alone on that highway, and the 13-year-old boy who ordered her death now drinking champagne in a Manhattan penthouse. On the fourth day, I made my decision. I transferred $10 million to a new account. Enough to build the life I wanted, but not enough to lose myself in wealth I hadn't earned. The rest would stay where it was, growing, waiting, a monument to my mother's sacrifice that I didn't need to claim. Then I created 2 packages. The first went to the FBI, containing every file from the account, every document my father had gathered, every crime my brothers had committed in their eagerness to expand the empire. The second package went to Raymond Finch with specific instructions. Deliver it to my brothers at exactly 2 p.m. on Tuesday, the same time they'd laughed at my envelope. I booked a flight to Zurich for Monday night one way. The arrests happened Tuesday afternoon. I watched from my hotel room in Switzerland as CNN broke the story. Federal agents swarming Thorn Industries headquarters. Garrett led out in handcuffs, his face a mask of confusion and rage. Holden, trying to run, tackled in the parking garage he'd just inherited. The news called it the largest financial crime bust in New York history. 3 decades of money laundering, extortion, and murder unraveling in a single afternoon. My package to them contained a single sheet of paper, the same aged stationery Victor had used for my envelope. The message was brief. Character determines worth. Enjoy what you deserve. The child who was never supposed to exist. Within hours, every asset was frozen. The properties, the yachts, the cars, all seized by federal authorities. Simone was caught trying to flee to Milan with suitcases full of jewelry. Miranda was arrested at the yacht club, still trying to register boats she no longer owned. The empire built on blood money collapsed entirely, taking everyone who touched it down except for one person. Me. I changed my name after that, became someone new in a country that understood reinvention. The $10 million I'd taken was more than enough to build something real. I started a foundation for children who'd lost parents to violence, kids who knew what it meant to be collateral damage in someone else's war. We've helped 300 families so far, giving them what I never had, someone who saw their pain and said it mattered. Heinrich Drucker still manages the main account. It's grown to over $200 million now through investments, a fortune that doubles every decade. He calls once a year, on the anniversary of my mother's death, always with the same question. Will you claim it this year, Mr. Preston? And I always give the same answer. The child who was never supposed to exist is doing just fine without it. Because that's what I finally understood, sitting in that Swiss hotel room watching my brothers' lives crumble on international television. Victor had given them exactly what they'd always wanted. The Thorn Empire. Every poisoned dollar of it. And he'd given me what I'd never known I needed. Freedom from it all. My mother died trying to save me from that life. Victor lived keeping me at arm's length to protect me from it. Every cold shoulder, every public denial, every reminder that I didn't belong. It wasn't rejection. It was preservation. He made me strong enough to survive without his love because he knew one day I'd have to survive without his protection. The real inheritance wasn't the money, or the evidence, or even the truth. It was the chance to choose who I wanted to be when everything I'd thought defined me was stripped away. Garrett and Holden never had that chance. They were born into the empire, raised to run it, and ultimately destroyed by it. But I was the child who was never supposed to exist, which meant I was free to exist however I chose. Sometimes I walk past banks in Zurich and think about those millions sitting there, growing like some golden tumor. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if I claimed it all. Then I remember my mother, dying to keep me from that money's source, and Victor, living in cold distance to keep me from its corruption, and I keep walking. Because some inheritances are too heavy to carry. Some fortunes cost more than they're worth. And sometimes the greatest wealth is discovering that you already have enough. That's the truth about being the child who wasn't supposed to exist. Once you accept it, you're free to exist entirely on your own terms. If this story resonated with you, Please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' recognition. Comment below with your thoughts on Preston's choice. Would you have taken all the money or walked away like he did? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about family, truth, and the choices that define us. Thank you for watching, and remember, your real inheritance is the freedom to choose who you become.